Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this members meeting for the Museums Association for museums across the southeast of England. It's great to have you with us today. My name is Eleanor Mills and I'll be chairing this meeting, and my colleague Geraldine is going to be facilitating in the background as well. For the benefit of any blind or partially sighted attendees, I'm a white cis woman with freckles and dark hair. We have live captioning available today at this meeting, which you can request to turn on at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you need any help at all, please just say so in the chat. We're using Zoom meetings for this event today, as I'm sure you're aware, and it would be brilliant if you could keep on your cameras but turn on mute so that we avoid any background noise. Do use the chat function to say hi to the room. Tell us why you're dialing in, and maybe share something exciting or positive that you or your organisation have been doing this week. We will also be taking questions via chat to make life easier for David Jewler, who's going to be chairing the panel a bit later on. Please could you put Q&A at the beginning of your question, and if applicable, let us know if it's for a specific panelist. And then if you're tweeting about the event, please use hashtag #MASoutheastEngland, which Geraldine will post in the chat now as well for ease. We will be recording today's meeting and it will be available after the event on our website. And if you want a copy of the chat transcript, then please email events@museumsassociation.org, which I'm sure Geraldine can post in the chat as well. And we can send over the transcript with ease. So as you can see from the programme, we have breakout discussions scheduled throughout this meeting. These are confidential spaces and won't be recorded. You can engage as much or as little as you like, or you don't even have to join at all, so don't feel pressured. That's pretty much all from me now. I'm delighted to hand over to Simon Brown, who's the Vice President of the Museums Association and Curator at Nottingham's Newstead Abbey and Project Curator at the National Justice Museum. Simon is going to speak today about organisational well-being. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Eleanor. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many people have signed up to be part of this meeting. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming. So as Eleanor has so eloquently said, my name's Simon Brown. I have the great honour of being Vice President of the Museums Association. So yes, in my day job, I'm in 2 part-time jobs as a curator. So there's a bit of juggling going on there, but I do get to spend half of my time at a beautiful historic house and formal gardens, and the other time in a Victorian prison. So, you know, sometimes it's worth having a bit of variety in our working lives. So I was given the great honour of the Vice Presidency of the Museums Association pretty much this time last year. I was appointed Vice President at the same time that our colleague Jill Findlay was made President. And I've been a trustee for 5 years now at the MA. Having been elected for 2 terms. It's a huge honour to be involved with the Museums Association, and as I'm sure you will know, having engaged with meetings such as this before, there is such a wealth of what the MA can do to support us in our work, and it's a real honour to be involved in that. But I'm always conscious of the fact that I'm here to represent you, to represent our members in the administration of the organisation. So please always be mindful of that. Us as trustees and as a board, we're always open to hearing from you and want to speak to you and hear from you. So please do contact us if you feel that there's anything we can be doing specifically more to support you as members. So Eleanor said, we want to speak a little bit more about well-being today. The reason being that when Jill was appointed President and we spoke together about the organisational priorities that are already set out in the strategic framework of the MA, there were 3 priorities really for our first period in this position. And those were addressing inequalities, both within the workforce and within society, addressing the climate crisis, and the third was well-being in the sector and in the general public. So it's good that we're going to have that time to focus on well-being today. When I think about that as a topic of conversation, well-being has been a constant touch point in dialogue at all levels during the pandemic that we're coming up to 2 years of now. So well-being is a phrase that's been used in government communication. It's been used in regional policy level, but I feel like it's been a general topic of conversation among families and friends for 2 years anyway. We're always talking about how we feel in a way that I never did before. I never used to talk about how I feel with my dad. We don't do that. Now we do. And I think that's one of those things that happens when we have this collective trauma in some ways that affects us all. And of course, in museums, we're a public service. So it's our role in museums to reflect that while also being open to the changes that it brings and trying to roll with them changes. One of the greatest things I've heard said about museums is that we must move with the rhythms of society. And I feel there's been plenty of examples of that in the past couple of years. And that's something that came up in, I think, the National Trust's curation instructions. So what I think of when I think of the term well-being, what I think of personally is about what makes me feel calm, what makes me feel protected and happy. Those are the things I think of when I think of my personal well-being. And I know we're in the Southeast today, so not many of you will also be supporters of Leeds United. But of course, I always feel calm, protected and happy through my football team, except those little bits on a Saturday afternoon when they're actually playing. But, you know, there's other ways of considering those things. I mean, I wasn't going to mention until I thought about what I was going to say today, but I've actually been isolating this week. I've had COVID this week. And today is my first day of testing negative, my first day out. So today, I walked our boys to school. We have 2 boys who are 10 and 7. And I was able to walk them to school and back. So just being outside in the sunshine and kind of engaging with the world, having been inside for a week, that was a joy. And I felt that was a bigger boost to my well-being as anything I've experienced fairly recently. So for me, on top of that kind of experience, the answer to what makes me feel calm, protected and happy always involves people being close to me, whether that's my family around me, my mates, my immediate family and my extended family and my colleagues, or going out to events, going out to things that people are at, going to football matches, going to gigs, going to the cinema, wherever. But being with, whether that's football matches, going to gigs, with other people and having a shared collective experience, those are things that boost my well-being. But of course, experience we've been deprived of over the past 2 years, and many people still are. And it's easy to forget that it's not all back to normal. It's easy to forget that, but we're not there yet. And of course, these are the kinds of experiences that the very best museums excel at, bringing people together in a new environment for a shared experience. What I've been overjoyed at recently is to see museums continuing to find ways of delivering those experiences throughout this 2-year period. I was really inspired by the nominees to the Museums Change Lives Awards that we held at Museums Association conference in November. If ever I want inspiration about what to do or ideas to try myself, I go to the case studies on our website. So I'd recommend you all to look on the Museums Association website at the case studies from the Museums Change Lives Awards. We were honoured to win one of those awards at the National Justice Museum. So you don't need to look at that case study, but look at the others and you will see some really great examples of what museums have been doing. I mean, I've also been overjoyed to see museums opening to the public again. And I still remember that feeling of opening the doors for the first time after lockdown and seeing people actually coming through the doors. That's been great. And I'm sure for a lot of you, as it has been for us, the half-term holidays that we've just had in February really did feel like a step up. People were buzzing to be back. but also crucially, staff were buzzing to be welcoming people back. And obviously, that's a difficult trick to pull off in a medieval prison, a National Justice Museum, but we managed it. So both there and at Newstead Abbey, it's been really beautiful to see people here. But of course, challenges remain. And, you know, I mentioned before that it's easy to think that we're back to normal now. And clearly, you know, government policy has been to try and help us move on from that and to try and change the laws around how the pandemic has been dealt with in that way. But it's all still here, and it all still informs our actions. So there are challenges that remain for the public, but also for our workforce. I think the biggest challenge that I see and experience amongst the public is general anxiety. And that's come about as a result of the pandemic, but also, I mean, just seeing the horrific news in Ukraine at the moment, I feel as anxious as I've ever felt. And to see anxious, and it's upsetting to see news like that. We also have to consider, is it safe to be around and outside and around other people? We all have different levels. We all have different stages of that journey that we're on. We need to consider those in our public. We also need to consider the endurance of the pandemic. The landscape around us has changed. Some public services have gone. There are some small urban areas, towns, villages, where even shops disappearing has been a big impact on that community. Places where people can come together. If those places aren't there, then that means people can't come together in the same way as they did before. When you add that to the climate crisis, when you add that to the cost of living crisis that we're looking at, these all add up to things that induce anxiety in all of us. None of this will be a surprise to you, and that just shows that that's the situation we're in. So that is a situation for us as people. That's also the situation for the public that we're here to serve. And when I think about the specific challenges for our workforce, for the people that work within museums, I've already outlined one. If I'm in isolation, and I see Simon, I'm sorry to hear that you've tested positive today as well in the chat. People still, you know, this virus is still out there, and there were processes to go through as a result of that. I've been working from home for a week, but I'm very lucky in that I'm supported by my employers to do that. The fact that those things are still happening bring about greater anxieties for all of us as staff in museums about working with the public. Do we feel safe working with the public? That's particularly acute in colleagues that are working front of house. So the options can be diminished there. You know, Tamsin makes a good point. I'm well enough to work from home. I'm really lucky that I've been asymptomatic. I'm in a really lucky position in that sense. And we need to consider those of us who aren't, and colleagues who aren't, even if we are. So we see that anxiety in all our work, in our colleagues around at work. There are a lot of people who have the pressure of the responsibility for those people, for looking after the well-being of our colleagues, people that we manage in our teams, while also considering the financial viability of our museums. So these are big challenges to face, and we're still facing them. And it feels like that we're almost moving beyond talking about the effects of that. It feels like we're all talking about the thing we're doing next, the thing that's been postponed because of the pandemic. I've already put on 3 exhibitions that have been postponed for 2 years. So, and all of the labour that goes into putting those things on means that it just adds to our workload. And when you consider that a lot of people working in museums have been on furlough, I was on furlough in one of my jobs, and I worked from home throughout in the other job. A lot of people were also redeployed into frontline services if they worked within local authorities. So some people have gone from working in the museum to working in a care home the next couple of days later, in amongst all this anxiety. And then some have come back, some haven't yet. These are big, big processes for us all to go through as people, things that we all need to process. And the result of all of that, and of having to work through all that, is burnout. And I think if there's one thing that I'm seeing more and more often amongst my colleagues, it's burnout, exhaustion. And that's a concern to me. And I'm sure it's a concern to you. It won't be something that I've only experienced in isolation. Now, I don't want to bring those things up in order to be depressing or in order to make this almost a gloomy thing to think about. But I brought them up because they are all in our minds. We are all thinking about these things. We're all having to address these things through our work. But they're challenges that we're all facing together in our work. And the Museums Association is here to support you as you navigate that process. That's the great thing about the Museums Association. It can support you in all the different areas of your work, at all the different levels of your career. There are different mechanisms to do that. And we're going to hear about that a little bit later on today. So if I think about anything that brings our hugely diverse sector together, is that we each have three broad assets, broadly speaking. We all have a space, be that a physical space within a building or outdoors, or a digital space even. It could be a temporary or permanent space, but we all have a space in which we deliver our activity. The second thing we all have, to a greater or lesser extent, is collections. We all deal with physical things, be that objects that we hold, objects that we loan in, objects that people bring to us, but we each address material culture. The third biggest asset that we have, well, the third of those big assets that we have, is people. The people that work within the museums, the people that come to us, the people who engage with us on all different levels, the people in our communities that we serve. Those are the three things that we all have. And the best work happens in museums when all three of those elements come together and reinforce each other's power. The great people that can use our collections, the beautiful buildings that showcase those people and allow them to do their thing. All those three things coming together means that we can do the great work that I know you are all doing. I think it's the people element that we need to concentrate our support on right now, both inside the museum and outside. So I hope that you can find some support that the MA can offer you to do that, to support your people, to support yourselves, and to allow us all to support the public. And you'll hear great examples of that today from my amazing colleagues at the MA as well. So please do come to us with your views on how we should do that, what we should do more of, what we should stop. Please do speak to us about what we can do to support you. Me and my colleagues on the board are put here by you, so please use that. Thank you very much for coming. I'm speaking of my brilliant colleagues here, speaking of which, I'll hand you back to Eleanor and leave you in her very capable hands. So thank you very much and enjoy today.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was really inspiring, and I really feel kind of ready. It's not ready to battle, but kind of really ready to kind of take on the world a bit more again, you know. But it's like you say, it's hard to kind of process what we've all been through over the last 2 years, because it's a lot. And I really love that we must move with the rhythms of society. I think that's really, obviously it's important, but it's a lovely phrase. So thank you so much. So now we are going to move into breakout rooms for 10 minutes on the subject of the Museums Change Lives campaign. We'll have about 6 people in each breakout room. So it's an opportunity to discuss in small groups how you or your museum is having a positive impact on the communities in your area. This might be through enhancing people's health and well-being, or inspiring engagement, debate, and reflection, or simply creating better places to live and work. It can be hard to share some of this work, so you know, or for others, and part of the museums change, as part of the Museums Change Lives campaign. So hopefully this is a good opportunity to talk and listen. So Geraldine, if you wouldn't mind setting up the breakout rooms, that would be fabulous. Thanks. Oh, are we in one? Am I in one? Am I back in the waiting room?
I don't think you get put in one, Eleanor.
Oh, fine. Okay, great.
Sorry. I couldn't quite remember, but I think it might. Yeah,
yeah, that's fine. That's totally fine. I might make
okay.
a cup. Have I got time to make a cup of tea?
Yes, you do. I think about 8 minutes. So.
Perfect. Yeah, plenty of time. I'll be back in a sec. I'll turn my video on.
Eleanor, you're muted.
Thank you. That's a a beginner's mistake. So I hope everybody's had really good discussions in their breakout rooms. Welcome back. We've got about 5 minutes now, and it'd be really lovely to hear about what you've discussed. So if you don't want to speak out loud, do you want to post any thoughts or reflections in the chat? And if anyone would like to speak out loud, would you like to unmute yourself and give us a little rendezvous of what you've talked about? Hi, Tamsin.
So I was in the most amazing group. So thank you very much, Dominic, and thank you very much, Mel. So it's Dominic's first foray into the Museums Association world. So welcome into the space. And we were talking about his experience at the Mary Rose Trust and what that meant in terms of re-engaging with local audiences after the pandemic, and looking at how local audiences that perhaps wouldn't have visited, what are the mechanisms to do that. Water and Steam, just FYI, Dominic, is a really good example. The Water and Steam Museum just did something really similar. So look them up. Yeah, it's Water and Steam, I think. And then we heard from Mel. So Mel is at Colchester and Ipswich Museums and did a really amazing, and I'll put the links in the chat in a minute, exhibition called The Power of Stories, which was around community voices from different types of communities coming together. They've just been nominated for a budget exhibition under the M&H show, whoop, whoop, and I'll pop all of that stuff there. But yeah, really good work. So I'm very energized, and I'll stop talking.
Thanks so much, Tamsin. Can I tempt anyone else onto the stage? Is anyone posting anything in the chat? No more takers? I can vouch. Oh, go on. Is that somebody else?
Yeah. Hi, Eleanor. I didn't discuss in my group because we ran out of time, because we had such good discussion about oral history and sound and other projects. It was really interesting. But you were there, obviously. Went to Manchester Jewish Museum yesterday, which does some amazing MCL related work, brilliant stuff connected to their communities, stuff to do with food, tons of oral history there, brilliant stuff to do with music and singing, and fantastic work with kids in what is they described as Cheetham Hill Road is apparently the most diverse road in the UK. So it's a brilliant story there. So I'd recommend Manchester Jewish Museum to anyone.
Thank you so much, Simon. It really was an inspiring day, and using food and music just seemed kind of so obvious, but sort of, you know, the number of groups that they have going and that they're using to inspire local communities, when that's the thing that talks to so many people, not necessarily interpretation in front of an object, but food and music really does. So that was really, it was just great to be there. And as Tamsin has highlighted, so I'm a proud Ipswichian, and it's brilliant to have you in the crowd, Mel. I didn't make it to the Power of Stories exhibition, but it sounded amazing. So well done on your work there. If nobody else is going to say anything, which I think it looks like, I'm going to move on and onto our next speaker, Sharon Heal, the Director of the Museums Association. And Sharon is going to talk today about how the Museums Association is supporting MA members and the wider sector. Over to you, Sharon. Thanks.
Thanks, Eleanor. And yeah, actually, I was in the breakout room that Simon was in, and it was really great to hear about the research projects happening at East London University with several museums in the city, I think, and also the oral history project, thinking about how we use audio in archives. I'm probably not describing or capturing either of those well, but it was really good to have those breakouts and to be able to have that chat. So yes, I'm Sharon, I'm the Director of the Museums Association. I'm also the chair of the Museum of Homelessness, and I'm a trustee of the Thackeray Museum of Medicine in Leeds, and I'm a trustee of the European Museum Forum, which runs the European Museum of the Year Awards. And the last one in particular is quite interesting because we had to have an extremely ethical and values-led discussion very recently at the European Museums Forum on the Council of Europe definition of Europe, which we use for the awards and at the forum, which includes Russia. The next conference that we're holding is this May. It's in Estonia, which borders Russia, and we've got candidates, did have candidate museums from Russia and from the Ukraine. So we had a really interesting discussion at our online board meeting last week about the implications of the invasion of Ukraine, and we published a statement just at the weekend. We want to support our colleagues in the Ukraine, but we also recognise that sanctions can hurt colleagues in Russia who are working in extremely difficult context on both sides of the border there. And I think what's happening in the Ukraine goes to prove that in museums we're not immune to what's happening in the rest of society. As Simon said, we don't exist in a bubble, either in museums or here in the UK. We're only separated by a small strip of water from mainland Europe. And I think we need to use our personal and our professional and our sector values to navigate this really difficult period, including using the code of ethics in thinking about, for example, issues around sponsorship and sanctions. Because as well as the risk to many, many lives and the threat to our colleagues who work in the Ukraine, there's also that risk to cultural heritage as well. Museums and their collections. There was an article in The Guardian a couple of days ago where an interview with someone from a local council in the Ukraine said, if we lose our heritage, we lose our identity. And it's certainly the case that invading forces have in the past and may in this case try to eradicate cultural heritage as a method of warfare. So we're acting in solidarity with our colleagues in the Ukraine whilst recognising the difficult position that colleagues in Russia have been put in. There's a statement on the MA website, and we're hoping to provide some real action and solidarity through some of our trusts and funds that we run. So kind of watch this space on that one. I think it also raises some interesting questions about our collective psyche here in the UK. On the one hand, it's great that we feel compassion for the plight of fellow human beings and compassion for the destruction of cultural heritage. You can see that in the collections of clothing and food that has gone on right around the UK, the offers of support from the UK museum sector to colleagues in the Ukraine. On the other hand, I think we need to just step back from that a little bit and ask why our reaction has not always been the same, for example, to events in Syria or Palestine or Yemen, where hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians have been caught in the crossfire in disputes there, and sites of international significance have been erased, absolutely flattened and erased in terms of the cultural heritage in those countries. And I just wanted to share a very quick video that really sort of raises some of those challenging questions for me. So I'm hoping you will hear the sound on this. Somebody shout out if you've not got the sound.
Interesting thing that I learned, and that is a lot of people on TV didn't expect a war like this to happen in, let's say, certain neighborhoods.
This is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe.
These are prosperous middle-class people. These are not people trying to get away from areas in North Africa. They look like any European family that you would live next door to.
What could be a difference here from other conflicts, you know, that could seem very far away, you know, in Africa or Middle East or whatever. I mean, these are Europeans that we're seeing being killed.
This isn't a place, with all due respect, you know, like Iraq or Afghanistan. You know, this is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen. Wow.
So I hope you caught all that and were able to hear it. I think it really does show how skewed some of the reporting has been. But also when I saw that, it was just circulated by a friend of mine to a group that I'm in, I also had to check some of the assumptions that I'd made and think about the language that had been used in that reporting, and think about even the response of the MA and why we've responded so quickly on the question of the Ukraine, and we haven't maybe responded with the same urgency in other countries when they've been impacted. So I think it's really important to do that and to check yourself and to think about your responses when you're reflecting on what's happening on the wider international scale. So at the MA, we've positioned ourselves as a campaigning, values-led organisation, which is important when thinking about how we respond to contemporary issues such as the invasion of the Ukraine. We're more or less at the 2-year anniversary of the first lockdown, and it would seem that the whole world has changed immeasurably since March 2020. And I guess one of the things we've all been asking, we've certainly asked this at the MA, is what have we learned and what does it mean for the future? How are we going to change as individuals, as professionals, as a museum sector? And at the MA, we've been reflecting on what more we can do to support you and what support we can provide for individuals and institutions. Because as Simon said, and thank you, Simon, for reflecting on wellbeing in a really honest and open way, the pandemic has been a real roller coaster. We probably all had up days, we've certainly probably all had down days, especially taking into account some of those bigger issues, including the Ukraine. And at the MA, we're passionate about wellbeing and supporting your wellbeing and supporting museums to support community recovery and wellbeing. And I thought about this the other day when I was sent an article from The Guardian about why we're suffering from collective brain fog. And I'm sure most of us will have had that experience where we can't remember the name of something really familiar or the name of someone really familiar, or we walk into a room and we don't know why we're there, or we can't just put the words onto the screen when we're creating documents. And that is because, according to the interviews with neuroscientists and psychologists, it's because of the impact of isolation, many of us working from home, many of us just staring at a screen for long periods. And it means we're not getting those new experiences that spark brain activity and creativity. It turns out that staring at the same 4 walls with just a screen for company is not good for us. But the conclusion of the article basically said we need to get out more, which is, as Simon said, great news for the sector. Museums are ideal places to have those stimulating visual and creative experiences. But we also have to recognise that some staff had no choice but to be out. I want to just take a moment to celebrate the value of our front of house staff, our visitor engagement staff, who have had to work more or less throughout, closing museums, reopening museums, closing museums, and had that interface with our audiences that have been able to come. And we're at the Museums Association working with the front of house museums network to publish a charter for front of house museum staff, which will be published later this month. Watch out for that on our website. And we have to recognise as well that some people might not still be comfortable with going out yet because they're shielding or they're not confident that dropping all the restrictions is the right approach just now. By the way, infection rates, don't want to worry anybody, but they're actually going up. I now know more people who've got COVID than I have done for a long time. And there's an impact of all of that on us as individuals in terms of our well-being, but also on our institutions and our communities and our visiting public. Last month, the Centre for Cultural Value produced a report on cultural engagement in COVID, and it had some interesting and worrying findings. It's really positive that 80% of audiences said that taking part in arts and culture was important for their well-being, but the report also found that COVID had aggravated and accelerated existing inequalities. So it's good to have that overarching picture from the Centre for Cultural Value, and as the MA we've been digging into and analysing what that means for museums, because whilst we're obviously interested in the wider cultural sector, we're also interested in the organisations in which we work. And of course, the picture is much more mixed and complex and nuanced than the headlines. It depends where you are geographically, whether you're in a city, a town, or in a rural setting, whether you're in the north or the south. Many museums are not back to full opening hours and may not be for some time yet. Anecdotally, we think visitor figures are at 40 to 60% of 2019 pre-pandemic figures, but it depends on the type of museum and the location. As I said, according to a recent survey by Museum Development in England, museum in urban areas experienced a 90% reduction in admissions income compared to a 60% reduction in rural museums. And it also depends which bit of the audience section we're thinking about. Families are back, and that might be linked to that desire for something new. School bookings appear to be strong across the board. In fact, some organisations are reporting that they're struggling to meet demand. But older visitors and volunteers are staying away. There's been a 70% reduction in the number of volunteering hours across the board in England, according to the MDO survey. And in terms of the income, spend per head is up, but that doesn't make it up for the overall loss of revenue from ticket sales. So there's quite a lot got to go at there in terms of understanding what the impact of COVID up to now and ongoing has been, and also for us to sort of recalibrate what our priorities as a sector and as the Museums Association should be. I mean, I think there's probably a realisation that it doesn't have to go back to 2019 and the pre-pandemic days. We can use this as an opportunity to rethink what museums are and what role they have in society, to support a better work-life balance for people who work in and with museums, and also to strengthen and develop those relationships with communities so that we can become the hubs of community support and well-being that are needed. There's some challenges within that. Holding on to the innovation and new ways of working that have been developed is a challenge, because there's a drag back to the old normal. Diversity is still an issue, and by that I mean the diversity of our workforce, volunteers, audiences and governance. We're still fairly monocultural across the board, and we need to be more representative of our communities. Funding is obviously a challenge. There's the inflation hike will impact museums because of fixed costs around energy and buildings, etc., as well as the impact of the pandemic. And we also know, obviously, that a lot of us have had really tough decisions around our professional lives, and it's become normal to have conversations about burnout and redundancy and exhaustion and anxiety. But the flip side of that is there are some opportunities. We need to retain what we can of what Simon talks about, responding to what's happening in the rhythm of external events, but also some of our optimism and our ability to see a future and support our communities in seeing that. So there's an opportunity to develop the hybrid and inclusive blended model. Many museums have reached broader and deeper than ever before as a result of these new ways of working. There's that opportunity to rethink what priorities are and put museums in a position of being central to community recovery. And there's an opportunity to develop those new ways of working, partnerships and collaboration across through the cultural sector and into the third sector with charities and our community partners. And in working out what our priorities are, we always go back to our values, our mission and our vision. Our mission is inspiring museums to change lives. Our vision is for inclusive, participatory and sustainable museums at the heart of their communities. And our values are centred around inclusivity, diversity and equality. And I think those have served us well, although I would say we're in year 2 of a 5-year business plan, and the first 2 years have just been completely characterised by upheaval and change, and inevitably that can change the actions and priorities and the direction that you're going in. Our top priority, without a doubt, as a membership organisation, is to support our members and the wider workforce. Tamsin will talk about more of that later on in this meeting. We know it's been a really difficult couple of years because of furlough, redeployment, extra workload, general precarity. The fact that we've clocked over 4,800 redundancies in the sector in the last 2 years, but we've tried to tailor our support with the knowledge that all of that has happened, and we put all of our professional development, offer online in the first instance, and developed lots of resources around our redundancy hub and also tailored career conversations, which Tamsin delivered, as well as managing the mentoring process and the offer that we have there. And she will talk about that a little later on. Advocacy has been hugely important to what we do. It's been centred around that idea of a cultural recovery, with museums at the heart of that, because we know museums can bring people back into towns and cities and rebuild community confidence. Museums can support recovery and well-being, and can help us just come to terms with and understand what's happened in the past 2 years and digest that and plan for a better future. So we've been doing that advocacy right across the UK, and that's helped with other sector bodies to win cultural recovery funding. So £2 billion nearly of cultural recovery funding across the UK, which has been absolutely fundamental to sustaining museum organisations. We've done lots of joint messaging. We've published our own research on the impact of COVID, including local authority funding, which was a 10-year look, which showed that it's been no surprise to anybody that local authority funding for museums has dropped by 34% across the board over that 10-year period. That means it gives us an opportunity to go back to government, to go back to local authorities, to go back to key stakeholders and funders and talk about that impact. So advocacy work is absolutely vital and carries on, and is guided by our reps, our stakeholder groups, and what you tell us. There's already been some mentions of content and case studies. Content's really critical and a big priority for us. We know that you need stimulating, thought-provoking content that can take us out of everyday drudgery, sometimes it is that, and widen our horizons and broaden our ambitions and really inspire us with the content that's in Museums Journal and on our website and in our events as well, such as this one, but also we did a whole series of coronavirus conversations. We've got members meetings coming up. We've got our conference in Edinburgh towards the end of this year that was mentioned in the breakouts and in some of the other conversations already so far. Last year at the conference in Liverpool, we had 500 plus in real life delegates and 1,700 online. We're aiming for more of that, and a hybrid conference in Edinburgh, which will be accessible to as many people as possible. Another priority for us is campaigning. It's central to what we do as an organisation. So the conference will cover our major campaigns with themes on climate, anti-racism, decolonisation, and well-being for workforce and communities. So on anti-racism, this month, watch out for our new Museum Essentials online training module on anti-racism, which I've read the content, it's absolutely brilliant, produced by Antonia, our policy officer, with a group of critical friends and other supporters, really stimulating content that will hopefully take us through that journey to becoming anti-racist and to thinking about what anti-racism means in the sector. And there's a clear link, I think, between racism and to our collections and the conversation about the legacy and impact of empire and slavery. The MA convened and supported the work of the Decolonisation Guidance Working Group, and we've published resources on our website in the campaign section and the guidance, which was published at conference last year. Please check it out. And we have just this week launched our Building Skills and Confidence programme around decolonisation, led by Roshi Naidu, who is going to put together a fabulous programme of workshops, peer support, training, leadership, networks, and that will be rolled out as a programme over the course of the next year. On the climate crisis, we saw, many of you will have seen that the National Museum Directors Council had a conference over the last couple of days in Manchester. We had staff there and our climate champion trustee, Sarah Kazan, who was chairing a session, and we'll be launching new web resources on that over the course of the next year and discussing it at a conference. And then on wellbeing, Simon touched about that, but we think it's really important to stress that idea that we need to look after ourselves and support our own wellbeing so that we can support community wellbeing and recovery. And we think the two are inextricably linked. We'll provide the support for individuals and the ideas and the content and the support to support museums and community recovery. And it links very clearly to Museums Change Lives, which is our flagship campaign. And then there's lots of other things that we do, our Learning and Engagement Manifesto, which covers cultural rights and cultural democracy, which was launched at MA Conference in 2020. Please check it out if you haven't already and think how you might implement it. A really critical priority and area of work for us is the work that we do around ethics. And I've personally gone back to the Code of Ethics possibly on a weekly basis over the course of the last couple of years, because it's part of our value system in the sector. And with COVID-19 and what's happened in the Ukraine, raising lots of ethical questions, and it is critical in supporting how we think and react. A big issue still unresolved, you'd be unsurprised to hear, is disposal. The truth is we've still got too much stuff, and in some cases that means contemporary collecting has been hampered because of lack of physical space. So we're embarking on a review of disposal guidelines. We had a great meeting with cross-sector bodies and organisations yesterday, and we'll hopefully be simplifying the process and the guidance around disposal, and also trying to get through some of those psychological blocks that I think we have in the sector around disposal. I'll just make a last couple of points about the support that we can give you. Funding obviously is critical. We've advocated for that recovery funding, which was successful, but we also deliver funding directly with our partners into the sector. The Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund is open for applications. That's £1 million a year that connects community and collections, and it goes straight into the sector, into the successful museums. But also we know individuals have been hit hard, so we've distributed £25,000 via our benevolent fund for support for CPD, for inclusive places at events, and for members facing hardship. We've worked with the Museum Freelance Network to deliver £30,000 of financial support for freelancers, and we'll be doing much more of that, and there's open funding calls there on our website if you look under the funding tab. And I'll finish just on the point of the future, because I think it's good to be optimistic, as Simon said, and to, as well as supporting our own well-being and supporting our colleagues, think about the future. Museums are reopening, they continue to focus on their building their audiences and they're bringing their communities back into the spaces. And museums, I think, if nothing else out of this crisis, we've learned that museums are about people. And you are the ones, as people who work in the sector, who are going to be doing the delivering, partnering, sharing, learning, leading, co-producing and engaging with communities to create brilliant experiences. And I would just finish on 3 things maybe that you could do to sort of support your thinking and creativity as part of that process. And that is around rethinking the value and relevance of the museums you work in and with, democratising our institutions through public engagement and open and honest conversations with our communities, and building our skills and well-being so that we can support our communities during the recovery. So I'm happy to take any questions, but it's brilliant to see everybody online, and I can't wait for those in real life events coming back as well.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That's so much to take in. With so many important points, and brilliant to hear about how the MA is supporting everybody across all of everything is equally as important as each other, as well as the things that we were doing before the pandemic and the things that have happened during the pandemic and the pandemic and how we recover from it. It's an awful lot to take in. As Sharon has said, do post any questions for her in the chat. She is very happy to answer. So now we are going to move on to Tamsin Russell, our Workforce and Development Officer at the MA, who's joining us here. Tamsin is going to discuss some of the professional development support that we offer to MA members. So over to you, Tamsin.
Wonderful, absolutely delighted to be here, and really lovely to see so many familiar faces and names in my digital space. I'm feeling quite energized about all of this. I've got a presentation that I can make available and I'll share as a PDF in the chat function at some point over this afternoon. But what I really want to do is give you some time for reflection as well. So the way I'm going to be presenting will be to start with you having at least 5 minutes to reflect on 2 questions. And then what I want to do hopefully is give you some food for thought about how you can develop, how we can support you, and essentially build on everything that we've already heard from Simon and also from Sharon. So my presentation is like a game in 2 halves to continue with our football theme. I am going to share my screen and you should see something that looks very colourful. So let me just go all the way back. I'm hoping it's telling me that you can see my screen. And so I'm going to take Zoom at face value. So welcome, we're in the southeast. I am in the north, I'm in Scotland, but waving down, looking down upon you from Scotland. And my session is around thinking about your professional development. I'm then going to give you, as I said, some insights in terms of what we've got on offer and build on everything that Sharon's talked about. And then I also want to just highlight very clearly the MA's commitment and again, showcase some of the things that we've already got in place. But within all of this, really just would encourage you either to ask questions in the chat function. If I've got enough time before we go into our break, I'll also give you an opportunity to ask questions of me at that point, but I'm also just available. So tomorrow I'm pretty much in back-to-back half-an-hour coffee conversations with a whole raft of different people. So if you don't want to ask a question either verbally or through the chat function, just drop me an email and we can either do an email exchange or we can grab a coffee digitally and I can listen to you and hopefully help you. So first of all, identifying your professional development needs. What I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to turn my camera off shortly, is to reflect on any of these questions. This is an individual reflection exercise. There is no expectation that you share any of the answers to these questions with anyone else apart from yourself. You don't have to answer every single question. You might be drawn to one of the questions on that page. But really what I want us to do is use this luxury of this event to ring fence 5 minutes for you to think about what is it you need from your professional development? What is it that can help you do your job or your role even better? What is it that will help you with your career aspirations? So hopefully everyone's clear. You've got 5 minutes. I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to place myself on mute, some quiet time, and I'll give you a countdown in. We've got about 30 seconds to go. Enjoy. 5 minutes. you're not in the zone to be thinking about your professional development, just think about all the really insightful observations and references that we've heard already. You've got another 2 minutes or so. Minutes and then we'll come back into the main space. Remember, we're not giving feedback. It's not a test. Just really want you to think about what you need to help you be the most amazing museum professional you want to be. Hear me. Now, the reason I got you to dedicate that time is, first of all, I know that often we don't dedicate time for us. We're too busy looking at our collections and our audiences and our teams. So those 5 minutes, which might have felt as if they lasted forever, is good time invested. And the reason I say that is that often people invest more time planning their 2-week holiday than they do thinking about their careers and their working lives. Yeah, I think it's really important to spend time thinking about your careers and working lives. If nothing else, from the fact that we spend more time awake with people we work with than with the people we choose to spend our lives with. And that always freaks me out, is that I'm spending more time with all of you guys. Thankfully, I love you, than my husband and my children, where usually I'm asleep on the sofa by about 7:30. So that's the reason it's important to invest that time, because actually the time we spend at work can disproportionately affect our experience of life. And certainly when we talk about well-being, if we've made or find ourselves in the wrong role or the wrong culture or the wrong organization, that can be really significant. Also, professional development for me should be joyful. It shouldn't be a burden. It shouldn't be a chore. And if you invest time and energy thinking about what you need, you have more focus, and that enables you then to realize those needs rather than adopting a scattergun approach. So sometimes in my conversations, my career conversations, people will say, oh, but what training shall I do? And my question back is, well, what do you want to achieve? What does career success look like for you? What are your ambitions? So again, just that 5 minutes, just getting a sense of what your aspirations are, what your ambitions are, is really, really helpful. So thank you for doing that for me, and thank you for doing that for you. So what have we got on offer? So I'm going to just give you a canter through what we've got on offer and just hopefully enable you to think about, is this for me? So One of the things I'm really happy about is that ultimately what we have on offer, it means there's something for everyone. So regardless of whether you're a permanent or fixed term member of staff, freelancer, volunteer, whether you're at the beginning of your career, mid-career, late career, if you are in a curatorial function, if you're a visitor services role, whatever you find yourselves in those 4 categories, there will be something for you as part of professional development at the MA. My role means that I have to balance what we offer for members and then also what we offer for the sector. So what you'll see is sometimes there'll be content or opportunities that we would class as open source, therefore are for the sector as a whole. Some might be information about well-being, for example, and that's still professional development. Or we might have something that's dedicated to members, which is either sort of this side of the paywall, or might have, for example, like the AMA, an additional cost. So I'm trying to keep all of these parts in process. We have a variety of membership options. And the reason I'm highlighting this is that some of you might be here thinking, oh, this is all very well, Tamsin, but I'm not currently an individual member of the Museums Association. Well, you can be. So we have a variety of different offers. So from essential membership to full membership to concessionary membership. Also, if you are an organisation that is hosting a kickstart placement, we have an offer so you can spend their valuable training budget on essential membership as well. So in terms of getting access to everything, what you might want to do is think about what your membership options are. This, I think, is a really sort of straightforward way of thinking about what we have on offer. So from sort of cradle to not the grave, cradle to retirement, if retirement is still on the table. So what we've got here is a variety of things. So Don't Stop Me Now and Moving On Up are our 2 one-day career events. And they happen in March, happened last week, is that right? And in November. So watch your space, or watch the space for deadlines for those. And then we have other different aspects with our Museums Essentials online learning programme, the AMA, mentoring, and the FMA. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just showing you what that looks like. So these are our current 4 courses, and we've had the Museums Essentials online learning programme with these 4 modules, I should say, since 2019. If you haven't signed up, please do so. It enables you to work at your own pace, in your own space, and your own place. So if you do like to read and reflect and watch films and see signposting, these are the modules that really help you from ethics through to communities, through to collections. For the AMA, and it's lovely to see some AMA alumni and AMA candidates in the audience, we have this development framework that supports you in your development. So we have a competencies that sort of highlight where you need to develop, what you might need to focus on. We have quarterly support groups where you get to talk about a different aspect of museum practice. So our next support groups are in April, and we're going to be talking about values-led practice and what that means, especially if there's a disconnect between your values and the values of your organisation. We've got funding, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, a variety of resources, lots of mentoring. So if you're on the AMA programme, you have an opportunity to be mentored over the course of the programme. And then we also run a variety of activities. So for example, at the end of this month, we're running a workshop all about advocacy, campaigning and activism. If you want to hear more about it, I can bore you relentlessly by watching a film on our website. So just go to our careers page. The fellowship is around an advanced level of contribution. And again, it's very similar. We've got a similar approach in terms of supporting any aspiring fellows. This is what we put in place. And again, this is Steph Mastoris, one of our fellows, and also one of our fellowship reviewers. You can go on our website and hear a little bit more about him talking about the associateship, but also how it relates to the fellowship. One of the things I've loved, certainly in the last 12 months, is how we've utilised the benevolent fund. So when I first joined, I think we got about sort of 10 applications in my first year. This year, we have funded 70 70 individual applications to support professional development. I couldn't be more happy. So if you're wondering what that looks like, that support for professional development, we've got some case studies on our website so you can see what it might look like. This is Rodrigo. So Rodrigo started his AMA during the pandemic, and one of the things that we supported him to do was a writing skills program so he could write exhibition text for his AMA project. So that's everything that we've got in terms of professional development. I want to now focus on well-being, and we're going to do a very similar approach. This time, just to put you under additional pressure, which is of course what you shouldn't do if we're talking about well-being, is I want you to spend 4 minutes answering these questions. So 4 minutes answering these questions. And what I'm going to do in exactly the same way is turn my camera off, put myself on mute, and I'll count you in when you've got about 30 seconds to go. So 4 minutes, look at these different questions. Go. Again, there's no requirement for you to work systematically down all of the questions. You might feel drawn to a particular question. There might be a question that resonates most for you. Just spend whatever time you want to spend looking at those questions around well-being. Still got another. Okay, so just about 30 seconds left. I'll bring you back into the room and then we'll talk about what we've got that might help you. It's another 30 seconds. welcome back. Carry on writing down. You don't need to stop writing just because I'm talking. And actually what you might find is this helps you make some connections really in terms of your well-being needs. For me, I just really want to emphasize that first question is, what does well-being look like for you? And I think it's really important to know what your limits are, what your normal baseline is. So I'm quite energetic all the time, so I need to really listen to my body if suddenly I feel that dropping. But my energy levels might be higher than your energy levels. So knowing who you are and how you respond is really important, because you need to be thinking about what does that look like when there is a change, what's going on. So what have we got that's available? So we've got our Wellbeing Hub. So we launched this during the pandemic and we are continuing to add new content here. The beauty of working in a digital space is that we can turn around any sort of subject very quickly so that there is additional insight specifically for our sector. Not that I like to hear about burnout, but we've heard about burnout from both Simon and Sharon, and we did highlight a new document back in February all about burnout and what that means, in addition to the other resources we have. Other kids on the block that are coming very, very soon is some details and some content about compassion and menopause, and also chronic health conditions. So those underlying chronic health conditions, including long COVID, that we might need to be mindful of either at an individual level or if we're responsible for a team. There's other content out there, so it's great to hear about the coronavirus conversations previously. So we do have some content about workforce well-being and other aspects about resilience and stress and workforce more broadly. So again, the Wellbeing Hub is a really good starting point for your focus about well-being more broadly. The other piece of research I just really want to highlight is our Sticks and Stones research, Bullying in Museums. So this was published in January of last year, and we are still committed to ensuring that individuals' experience of work wherever possible is not reflected in how they're being treated. What we do know is that bullying creates, endorses and perpetuates exclusion. Our research very clearly highlighted that a number of protected characteristics by equality legislation, so for example, age, disability, gender, were three aspects that very clearly were factors around why people were being targeted for bullying, why they were being targets by those perpetrators. So have a look on our website. We've got a variety of materials. So we've got a very brief executive summary that you might want to, put under somebody's door in a stealth-like manner, or certainly send to individuals that have a responsibility for staff or well-being. And we've also got a recommendations list that enables you to think about what you could be putting in place in your organisation, in your team. What does it mean for you to be a co-worker? What does it mean if you're somebody that is a line manager? Equally, what does it mean for you if you are the person that's the target, or potentially you think you're a perpetrator? Are you seeing some bullying characteristics and behaviours coming from your mouth, coming through how you respond to other people? So really would urge you to have a look at this information. In my final slide, before I hand back to Eleanor Mills, just really wanted to highlight what's coming next. So for those of you that don't know, apart from that, I've got an extra 2 in that, it is National Careers Week. So we are launching a next batch of career conversations. Career conversations were the 1-hour conversations with me that we launched as part of the pandemic. They are now part of our core offer. So we will see there will be opportunities twice a year. So essentially about 80 to 100 conversations that we can get over each year. So watch this space. We're launching those formally tomorrow. Front of House Charter for Change is a really important piece of work, which is ensuring that our front of house colleagues are respected and treated professionally. And we are going to highlight, again, some behaviours that would support that. We've got a new integrated and overarching competency framework being launched in the spring, and that will support our new modular approach to professional development. So if you're doing the AMA or the fellowship, watch this space again for opportunities really to focus your learning on what you want to achieve. New museum essential modules coming. Anti-racism, we've heard about that. We've got decolonising and also climate crisis. In the autumn, we've got a new inclusive careers hub, which will have individual role pathways. So where do I go through from here? Mentoring that we did back in the 2 years of the global pandemic, we are going to relaunch as a standalone program. So watch this space, that will be autumn. And then what we're also trying to do wherever possible is utilize Hook Week. So for example, National Careers Week this week, but we've got Mental Health Week, Learning at Work Week, both in May. We've then got Volunteers Week and Freelancer Week in June, and Inclusion Week in September. So a whole raft of things really just to make sure that we are packaging up all of our content in a way that enables you to develop. I will stop there because I have now gone over by 30 seconds, and I will hand back to Eleanor, who will see us into the break, I think.
Thank you so much, Tamsin. That was really useful. I mean, it's just so useful to reflect on these things at whatever point of your career. And I love Cradle to Retirement, our offer that we give to everybody. So I hope everybody found that just as useful as I did. Again, if you have any specific questions for Tamsin, please do drop them in the chat. Now Tamsin was bang on, we are going to have we're going to go for a 6-minute break until 3:30. So do feel free to switch cameras off, or if you want to stay here and chat, you're very welcome. I'm going to switch my camera and mute myself and make a cup of tea, and I will see you back at past. Thanks. Welcome back, everybody. I'm not on mute, am I? No, good. Okay, excellent. Now we are going to move on to the very important topic of decolonisation and decolonising museums. I'm very pleased to introduce Antonia Canal, the MA's Policy and Campaigns Officer, and Alistair Brown, the MA's Policy Officer. They're going to run this session, which explores decolonisation, and as well, they're going to tell us as well about the very important work of the MA's Decolonisation Guidance Working Group. So welcome, Alistair and Antonia, and I look forward to hearing about it. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, really great to be here this afternoon and to see so many familiar faces and new faces. Yeah, we're delighted to share some of the work that we've been doing at the Museums Association on decolonising practice in museums. And what we want to look at this afternoon is really what decolonisation means in practice in a museum setting, and what next for the museum sector in terms of decolonising. I should introduce myself. I'm the policy manager at the Museums Association. And Antonia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Antonia and I'm Policy and Campaigns Officer at the MA. And yeah, we've both been working on the MA's decolonising work for some time. And we'll talk a bit more about the guidance that we've produced recently later on in this session. So decolonisation is, if it seems almost like it's a bit of a buzzword, it's absolutely everywhere in museums and in wider cultural heritage debates at the moment. We're seeing a particular moment of focus on decolonising practice, due in particular to the huge social movements that we've seen particularly over the past couple of years around the Black Lives Matter protests, which obviously were resurgent after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, both on the other side of the Atlantic and indeed here in Britain. So we've got some images here from the States and also from the very famous dunking of the Edward Colston statue in the harbour in Bristol, which caused so much controversy here in the UK. Yeah, Antonia, let me hand over to you. Thanks, Alistair. Yes, I think it's always really helpful to sort of take a step back as to sort of how we've got to this as being such a high priority area for museums as well as lots of other places in society. And we wanted to share a bit on why decolonise museums. It's something that we did a lot of thinking about with the working group. And I think it's also something I'd encourage everyone here to just think for yourself, why does decolonising matter to you? Why could it matter to you? Some of the reasons we've thought about is that there's a really strong moral and ethical need to deal with museums' colonial legacy. I think that's captured really powerfully by what Alistair was describing in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the activism from there. There's also that need to deal with long-standing exclusion and misrepresentation of people and communities in museums, and how that continues to be an issue for those of us who work in museums, how we change that. There's also the need to sort of deal with how that legacy of empire and colonialism shows up in our collections, in our displays, and the ways in which that reinforces racism today. And then, of course, there's the issue around items that museums hold that were stolen during the colonial period, and how we sort of address needs around justice when it comes to those items. So there's just a few ideas of why decolonising is important for museums. And I'll hand back to Alistair.
Thanks, Antonia. Move slides here. So I just thought it would be useful to think through practically what we're talking about when we talk about the colonial museum and what decolonising then looks like in practice in the museum context. So top left photo on the screen here is if you like the archetypal colonial era museum of the colonial era. It's the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford University, and it is a treasure trove of ethnographic and anthropological items collected from all over the world, in particular from areas within the British Empire, but not exclusively. And it is organized and taxonomized in ways that made sense to the colonial explorers and academics who originally were responsible for collecting and bringing together and presenting these collections to the public. The Pitt Rivers obviously was for a long time most famous for the shrunken heads that it had on display from South America, which have recently been taken off display. That's a really interesting kind of decolonizing case study, if you like. But the Pitt Rivers is a really interesting example because it is this museum that is full of items that were collected during colonial times. Lots of the language that is used in the labeling and in the explanations of the items in the museum are out of date or downright racist. But the museum is making a real effort now under the direction of Laura van Broekhoven, who runs the museum, to effectively decolonize the museum. Now that doesn't mean kind of clearing everything out. They have taken some things off display, like the shrunken heads, but they've also been doing really interesting work to change display labels, looking really in depth at the history of individual objects. They've been working closely with source communities for much of the collections. They've done really interesting projects with Maasai people from Kenya recently, and from various others as well. And this is a fascinating example of a really kind of obviously colonial museum, which is making efforts to change that and to consciously reappraise its collection and reappraise its own institutional past. The same goes for the museum on the right here, which is the Hunterian Museum in Glasgow, another university museum which has similar kind of collections and is taking a similar approach to rethinking them. They've also done some really interesting work around repatriation and restitution, but that's only one small part of their approach to decolonizing this space. And then at the bottom, we've got Penrhyn Castle in Wales, a National Trust property now, but which is built on the proceeds of the transatlantic slave trade, and which is enormously controversial building to this day in Wales, and where again they're taking they're starting to take a real interest in explaining to the public the history of the building and its links with its links with the slave trade, as well as the kind of the more well-known links that it has with the strikes and industrial action in North Wales in the early part of the 20th century. So some interesting examples of really obviously colonial or museums with obvious kind of colonial and slave trading era links. But it has to be said that every museum will have some connection with the colonial era. It might be a direct connection, like in the Pitt Rivers, but it might also be an indirect connection. As with Penrhyn, it's to do with, you know, where did the funds and the wealth come from to create the building itself in the first place. Antonia, let me pass on to you for the next slide.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, so really just building on some of those examples that Alistair shared, we just wanted to say a bit more on what decolonising can involve, because, you know, it is a term that you might hear in lots of different places and spaces and not necessarily know exactly what it can involve. And how we sort of understand it is really decolonising can be any action that's seeking to address that institutional bias that museums will have in relation to legacies of empire and colonialism. So that can be anything from addressing the ways in which that colonial history shows up in how the museum is run and organised, like Alistair mentioned with Pitt Rivers, it's really clear there. Equally, it can be about collections practices, but also knowledge, skills and representation gaps that exist within our museums, again as a legacy of, you know, how empire and colonialism can show up in the ways in which museums are run. And I think, you know, Alistair mentioned the Hunterian in the previous slide, and it's very interesting that they have created the role of a curator of discomfort, which Sandra Yeaman is leading. So that, I think that's a really interesting example of a museum directly addressing that knowledge and skills gap through its staff team. Alistair's already touched on this, but really any and every museum can use decolonising practice. You know, all sizes of museums, all types, all locations, there's always going to be an opportunity to be part of this work. We also just wanted to emphasise that it's not just about repatriation and restitution, and they're both really important issues when it comes to decolonising, but that's just one part. We're talking about decolonising all areas of museum practice, which goes beyond collections work. It's worth noting too that decolonising will be a long-term process involving lots of areas of work. It's not going to be something that museums can solve with a one-off project or a quick fix program. It is going to be a long-term piece of work because this is about structural change. But it can also very much be the basis for really exciting new partnerships and new ways of working. So that's just a sense of some of the things that decolonising can involve.
Thanks, Antonia. And yeah, just to sort of illustrate some of the points that Antonia's just made, I just wanted to sort of flag some of the initiatives that have been happening recently across the UK that embody this approach of decolonising and actively, consciously decolonising our museums. The first photo up here is of an Oba king in from Benin City in Nigeria. Many of you will have heard of the Benin bronzes. Many of you will have seen them at museums, perhaps at the British Museum or elsewhere in the UK. The history of these items is particularly contested and particularly interesting from a decolonising point of view. Partly because they are just so iconic, but partly because of the very specific history that lies behind them. That they were very clearly the subject of a looting expedition in 1897, which is very well documented, and they were subsequently brought back to Europe and shared amongst British, other European and American museums, and spread around the globe. So hundreds of them are still at the British Museum, but many of them are in different institutions around the world. And because it's such a well-documented case of looting as part of a sort of punitive colonial expedition, these items have been particularly subject to claims for their repatriation and restitution. That has really started to happen recently. So in the UK, the University of Aberdeen and Jesus College at the University of Cambridge announced that they were going to repatriate their individual examples of Benin bronzes last October. That's been followed up by Newcastle University, the museum there, announcing that they will return their Benin bronze. And there's been a lot of activity also in amongst colleagues across Europe in consciously deciding that the appropriate moral thing to do is to return these items. There are still hundreds more that are in British museums and other Western museums, but there is definitely a sea change happening. There is a decision to return these items, and that builds on some of the really major work that's been done around repatriation and restitution, particularly a French report that was commissioned by President Macron a couple of years ago now, the Savoy-Sarr report, which really set out sort of a new basis for returning items to colonial powers, which made an assumption that repatriation and restitution was the correct was effectively the correct outcome, unless the parties could agree differently, which really kind of flips the idea of repatriation being subject to claims by the source party or source country, then being answered often very slowly by museums or governments in the West. So there's some fascinating stuff happening around repatriation and restitution at the moment. But as I hope Antonia and I have both made clear, repatriation and restitution is not synonymous with decolonizing. It's one small part of decolonizing activity. Hopefully that's clear from the next example, which the top right image here is of an example, is of an exhibition at Birmingham Museum from 3 or 4 years ago now, called The Past Is Now, which is a hugely influential exhibition, in which external curators were asked to come in, a group of external curators were asked to come in and really appraise or reappraise Birmingham City Council's collections from a colonial standpoint. And they put on a fascinating exhibition which looked at Birmingham and Birmingham City's role in empire, as an industrial powerhouse, as a major producer of weapons. But it also looked at some of the gaps in that story, the things that Birmingham had neglected to collect over the past couple of 100 years, which were a major part of the British colonial experience. They talked about the gaps in terms of Joseph Chamberlain, who's the father of one of the fathers of Birmingham City, who was also a major proponent of British colonial expansion, and the fact that actually there was relatively little to illustrate that aspect of his work within the collection. So it was a fascinating example of using that a really kind of critical lens and reappraising and looking at existing collections, lots of which often seem to have absolutely no initial link with colonial experience. The bottom left-hand corner, we've got a lovely image of Percy Powell Cotton, after whom the Powell Cotton museum is named in southeast of England. And I'm not sure if we've got anyone from Powell Cotton Museum on the call today, but certainly the work that's been done there, both in terms of looking at the ethnographic and anthropological collections that Powell Cotton brought back to England but also in terms of the natural history collections. And this is what I particularly wanted to illustrate here, is that there is also a role in for using a decolonial lens when we're looking at natural history collections, thinking about where items have come from, how we describe natural history collections, and how we describe the places where they were collected. All of these are worth looking at and thinking about when we think about how we describe them, and how we share that knowledge with our visitors. These things can be subtle, but they can really help to shape how people think about the world around them. And finally, the image in the bottom right-hand corner is another statue. Images that statues have obviously been a huge issue in terms of the wider cultural debate around decolonization, around sort of contested heritage in the last couple of years. I mentioned the Colston statue earlier. This statue is the statue of Robert Milligan, another noted slave trader and slave owner, outside the London Docklands Museum, and which was removed during the Black Lives Matter protests 18 months ago. And this was a decision that the museum took an active part in, along with the mayor's office and so on. And they recognised that actually this statue that celebrated this slave owner didn't have a role to play outside a museum that was trying to tell a much more modern history of London, of London's Docklands, and the role that they played in the growth of London, and wider global expansion. So these are some examples of areas where museums have really actively thought about decolonizing practice, and I hope that they show the breadth of decolonizing practice in the sector as well. I'm going to pass over to Antonia.
Thanks, Alistair. So next up, we just wanted to spend a bit of time talking about communicating decolonizing practice. I think this is useful to think about if it's a new area of work for you when it comes to decolonizing, but also if you're further along in your journey. It's just helpful to come back to this because it's a really useful way, I think, to bring people along in the work you're doing. A few things to think about when it comes to communicating this work is it's really important and useful to have a clear sense of your objectives for the work, and a sense of why your organisation, your museum is committed to this work. It goes back to us talking about the why earlier. It's just powerful to have a strong sense of why you're doing this work, and making sure that everybody's clear and on board with that. We also wanted to say that, we at the Museums Association are still very much using the term decolonising and decolonisation, but it's not necessary to label all of this work publicly as decolonial or decolonising. We recognise that it's a term that won't necessarily fit for all museums. We still think there's a lot of power in it, but actually the most powerful and important thing is to do the work and do it in a way that suits your organisation and the people involved with your work. So I guess our kind of message here is to not get stuck on the term, think more about the work itself and how you want to communicate the work you're doing. And we'd also say it's really helpful, I think, to have a clear plan and considerations of how you deal with any queries or criticisms or questions about actions and changes you're making as part of your decolonising work. Again, just I think as that chance to bring people along with you on the work you're doing, but also from a well-being and care perspective for, your members of staff, particularly those working on the ground, working directly with people. I think it's just important to know how you'll deal with any kind of pushback or criticisms that might come, and also having a plan for capturing all the positive engagement that you will get from doing this work too. So those are just a few things to think about when it comes to communicating this work. And I'll hand back to Alistair.
Thanks, Antonia. Yeah, definitely agree with that point about how we label and think about this. And for some organisations, they'll absolutely grasp the idea of decolonising and the language around it. Others won't want to necessarily use those terms, but it's all as Antonio says, it's much more about doing the work and doing that kind of reappraisal and using this sort of decolonial lens than it when you're looking at the work that you're doing, than it is about shouting about decolonizing directly with your audiences, for example. I think we're really keen to also talk about this in a really positive sense, and see decolonizing practice as being a really big opportunity for the sector. It is an opportunity. Hopefully, the examples I've shared with you show that it's an opportunity to reimagine our museums, the stories that we tell, the things that we share with our visitors and with our public. It's an opportunity in some cases to redefine a museum's whole purpose. That museums can completely reconceive of what they're for if they want to really kind of get really deep and look at their collections, how they were brought together, if they have that really close or strong colonial history that they really want to engage with and rethink, then it can be a really, really deep process that the museums want to get into. It can be an opportunity to build trust with new communities and to build new relationships, and really also to bring new collections to light, to bring whole new collections and things that are often hidden away in stores, which perhaps have been overlooked by curators in the past, and to create new connections between those collections and between visitors and communities of people who may well be interested in it and interested in the stories that it can tell. And finally, it's an opportunity to champion equity and justice in the broadest sense, and that's certainly something that the MA believes in very powerfully. So yeah, an opportunity that we want to share with everyone. And Antonia, I'm just going to pass over to you for the next slide.
Thanks, Alistair. So I think we've been referencing it throughout, but we have at the Museums Association launched our Supporting Decolonisation in Museums guidance, which is available on our website. This has been produced with our decolonisation guidance working group, who devoted so much time and energy and expertise to sort of bringing this guidance together. So really want to sort of recognise and celebrate them as well. But the guidance sort of speaks to all areas of museum practice. And there's lots of different ways that you can sort of work with it and fit it alongside your museum and your priorities. So sort of really encourage you to take a look at that online. And we're also really excited to share that we're going to be launching a new programme this year, which I will hand over to Alistair to speak about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will we'll share in the chat all the appropriate links for this. We're really proud and pleased to have launched the Supporting Decolonisation in Museums document that we were just talking about. It's a really good starter. It's a good place to start if you're thinking about going on this journey and thinking about how your museum can bring that decolonising lens to its work. And I'd really encourage you especially to look at the principles at the start of that document, because they're a really good way of framing work that you want to do around this. as Antonia said, we're building on the document that we published last year. We've got a new program that we've launched. We've got a colleague who's just begun working at the Museums Association called Roshid Naidu, who is going to be running our Decolonisation Confidence and Skills program over the course of the next year and a half. We've just announced her appointment on the website this week, and we will be recruiting a cohort of people to go through the work that she's producing, a series of really interesting talks, workshops, and opportunities to network and think through your own ideas about decolonising museums. And that will be starting up. That work will be starting up later this year. But we're really keen to hear if you are interested in taking part in that work. So there is a form on our website where you can express your interest. If you're interested in taking that up, we'll share that in the chat in a moment as well. And finally, the link that's on the page at the moment is our sort of hub online for all of our information around decolonial practice. So you'll find the guidance there, as well as a number of really interesting case studies, videos, and other really interesting links around this work. So we really want to bring as much of that together in one place as we possibly can. And I think that brings us to the end of our half hour, almost bang on time. So I will hand back over to Eleanor, and she'll tell us what's coming next.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much, Antonia and Alistair. That was really brilliant and so excellent to hear about your work and what museums across the country can really be doing, across the nations can really be doing to forward this practice from the ground up. So we're going to move on fairly swiftly onto our panel discussion, which is going to look at how museums across the Southeast are helping to tackle the climate crisis. So I'm now going to hand over to our chair, David Jewler, who's the Trusts and Foundations Officer for Gardens, Libraries and Museums at the University of Oxford, and a Southeast MA rep. David will be chairing the discussion today, and on the panel we also have Louisa Jones, the Learning Officer at Amberley Museum in Sussex, Ian Titley, the Curator at Herne Bay Museum Trust in Kent, and Marta Lomza, the Community Engagement and Exhibitions Officer at the Museum of Oxford. Thank you so much, and I shall hand over to David now.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Eleanor, for that introduction. As Eleanor said, I'm the Trust and Foundations Officer for Gardens, Libraries and Museums at the University of Oxford, but I'm also one of the Museum Association's reps for the South East. So it's a real pleasure to be able to chair this panel discussion about what museums are doing to help reduce our impact on the climate. We've got a great panel. They've all working in different organisations within the South East. And as Eleanor mentioned earlier, we'll have a bit of time for questions, so do put those in the chat as we go along as well, and I can put those to the panelists. I'll introduce each panelist in turn. They'll do a short presentation for about 5 to 8 minutes. So if I do jump in, panelists, I'll try to do it as sensitively as possible. And as I say, we'll do some questions at the end. So just because I'm wary of time, on to our first panelist. Louisa Jones is the Learning Officer at Amberley Museum in Arundel, Sussex. Louisa has 8 years experience working as an educator with schools and young people in the performing arts, environmental and heritage sectors, mainly in open air museums. She also spent the last 3 years moonlighting as a climate activist. So over to you, Louisa, to kick us off.
Thanks very much, David, and thanks for inviting me to take part in this. I've got a bit of an issue. I think I might not have authorization to share my screen.
I can share your screen, Louisa. I can share your slides if you.
That would be great. Thanks for that. Don't know what's going on there. Great. Well, while that's getting sorted, I will just I'll say I'll tell you what, I can't tell you anything about making your actual museum operations more environmentally friendly. I'm not really a specialist in that, but I'm not even, wouldn't even call myself really a community specialist, although what I do is schools and families mostly. But I do have quite a few years now of experience being interested in and involved in the kind of wider, various strands of the environmental movement in England. So I thought that might be the best thing to talk about to an extent today, what I've learned from that journey and how that can apply to your own forays into working on climate change in your museum. So yes, that's fine. Next, that was my message. If we can do it, so can you. So just some kind of processes really that you could get started in your museum, because there's a huge amount to do. We're in a climate emergency. You're probably aware of how dire the situation really is. Every museum can do something, obviously, and I think the first slide, I just wanted to show that everybody's going to have strengths and weaknesses, and you'll have to work with where their museum is. You can see the Amberley Museum was a chalk quarry for about 150 years until mid 1960s, I think, and it was pretty bleak. It wasn't heavy industry, but fossil fuel powered industry. South Downs, which is now a national park, turned into a moonscape. We've been open for just over 40 years as a museum, and look at what we've become now, almost like a rewilded site, really. As well as being able to we're in an interesting position to be able to tell the story of how the industry that used to be on our site has affected the climate, and we're in a national park as well. So those are our sort of big pluses. It's a really interesting place to try and interpret that. We're mostly outdoors. We don't have a lot of budget. Our community is quite difficult to hit because we are rural and historically haven't had huge community links like you might do if you're in a town or something. But we have a small team that has a high level of control over what we do. So we are able to make changes fairly quickly if we all work together. So that's sort of where we are at Amberley Museum, and just bear that in mind as I keep talking. Next slide. I'm going to talk about two things that you can do easily at your museum to get started. So green team. Oops. The green team, it's been going for about a year at Amberley. If you don't have one, why not try it out? It's really, it's pants to be working on this kind of thing by yourself, to be honest. It can be really soul destroying and you feel really passionate, and you might feel really alone because you can see things happening on site which you don't like. But actually, once you start talking to people, you realize that there are a lot of similarities. We often have sort of synergies with other people who don't realize. So why not call a space where you can start discussing this together? And I've just put some really key points about it, is that it needs to go across all areas, really. So we've got staff, trustees and volunteers all working together on a kind of equal footing, which I think is just really important. And also something I've learned from being in the activist movement is that working group structure is really useful. So what I mean by that is that everybody who comes, you should be there because you want to do something, and people will take on a responsibility and then they'll report back. It doesn't necessarily need to have somebody who's kind of taking the reins, like one person. It should be a collaborative effort. And then I just think treat it seriously. I'm in a privileged position where we have a team, like I said, where our director is very supportive, so we've been able to do this in staff time, I suppose, rather than a lunch break or something like that. But you know, it is a serious thing, and there are implications clearly for all sorts of things like accreditation and funding. So it really should be in something that can happen in work time, you know, with what you do for any other meeting. So a coordinator and minutes. Set objectives. I said, well, we have more at the moment. We have more of a policy that we're working to fulfill, more than set objectives. But I think we're still kind of easing into it, and hopefully we will be able to put a few more objectives in place as things go. Aim high and persist. Well, I mean, how many times have we talked about recyclable cups or compostable cups in the last year? It's starting to do my head in. But, you know, we have been able to kind of move beyond that onto more pressing things. So I think that the important thing is to make a start, get everybody in the same place and feel like you're enthused by one another, and then you can start doing amazing things. So just a little in that box, some of the things that we've achieved in the year. And like I said, first one is really just about realizing that I'm not alone. And you know, there are loads of people in the museum who want to do stuff, too much stuff sometimes. So yeah, we've got a no-mow policy, meaning that we can let wildflowers go through their usual cycle, and we can have interpretation about that as well. We'll let you read the rest of those bits for yourself. But another thing that we achieved was doing a World Environment Day, which is my next point. World Environment Day event, which anyone can do. And we did this just after we'd reopened after COVID, and we weren't sure how many people we'd get to come from the local community. My idea was that we should bring people on site to showcase what they do, because, you know, most museums, I would say, you know, don't feel like you have to reinvent the wheel. There's people who've been doing this stuff for years in your community. So you might not know about these sorts of groups, but they are surely around you. You know, if they're in rural West Sussex, then they're probably in your area as well. So we had climate pressure groups. You can go everything from your NGO kind of local chapter like Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace, and there's often sort of local climate pressure groups as well that are doing divestment campaigns for pensions, the local council, for example, or even in Extinction Rebellion. They're good to have on site. Any one of the other ones that I want to particularly point out, TCV means the Conservation Volunteers, and they're a big charity with lots and lots of different, like probably hundreds of tiny community groups around the country. And they sort of fund, well, it's a big charity that funds these little groups, basically. So there might be one near you, and they might even want to come and do some conservation work on your site, which is what we ended up teaming up with our local one for. Energy cooperatives, good to look out for, because they might even like to install some solar panels for you, which happened to us. There's lots of charities around that redistribute food waste. For instance, Fair Share has lots of different regional chapters. Repair cafes and transition towns are other movements that pop up everywhere, really. So repair cafes is about ensuring that you don't have so much electronic waste, or any waste really. It's about repurposing and making your consumer items last for longer, and they can do nice demonstrations on site. And transition towns is more about decarbonising spaces. So loads of ideas there, and you know, you've got a whole new kind of ready-made event if you get a few stalls in. And also, I just found one of the best things about this was finding a whole new community out there that our museum didn't know that existed, and we're hoping to turn this into an annual event and have lots of different kind of education activities with it. So that's number 2. And number 3 is a bit of a cop-out, really, because it's not something that I said easy. It's not really easy to make it mainstream, but I just think that it's something that we have to remember, is that this is becoming, it's not just a nice to have now, or something that's, you know, only is really like a minority interest. I think more and more, especially with young people, if you've been watching the news over the last few years, you know, this is something that the majority of people care about now. And if you can look at climate research by organizations like Climate Outreach, which done audience segmentation for how people think about climate change, and all sectors of society have something that they can tap into that they care about, which relates to the climate. If you're really at the beginning of your journey, you might like to look at carbon literacy training, which is something that I did, and Marta, who's going to speak, did speak about. Probably not going to speak about that, but we did that together in the last month or two. It is quite basic, I would say, but if that's where you are, then it is a good introduction to what museums can do. And yes, I think that's really, I'm probably at the end now, but I'm just to say, keep in touch. If anybody would like to talk to me more about it, there's my email address. I'd be really interested to talk to people more about, what you're doing, how we can support each other in a network way, perhaps. So yeah, looking forward to your questions, and of the other speakers, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Louisa. It was really interesting, and it was great to see the changes on the site as well. I think from the black and white photographs and everything being so green, it's lovely to see. And also really important, I think, about getting people together to sort of tackle it as a team rather than just one or two people in an organisation. So moving swiftly on to Ian Titley. He's curator at Herne Bay Museum Trust in Kent. His working life was spent at the Natural History Museum in London as a collections manager and researcher. And since retirement, he's become a science associate there. His particular specialism is coastal and marine natural history. So the effects of climate change is something he's following in his current research. As honorary curator at Herne Bay, Ian has mounted several environmental related exhibitions, such as a really rubbish exhibition dealing with waste and recycling, and more recently, Herne Bay's Extreme Weather, a Climate Warning. So over to you, Ian.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm just trying to share screen, and I think, again, I may have to ask Eleanor to stand in for me. Eleanor?
And we'll get that up now.
It's not sharing as I wanted it to. But good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to, while Eleanor's getting it up, welcome to sunny Herne Bay on the North Kent coast. Just a few miles up the road from the Powell Cotton Museum that we were talking about a few minutes ago. As said, I'm the honorary curator at the Seaside Museum in Herne Bay, right in the centre of town, 50 metres from the seafront. And just to kick off, to say that really we are in a place that is quite prone to flooding, both by rain and by the sea. We get warnings from the Environment Agency every now and then. And indeed, on last summer, we had sad news that a museum in Wales, Pontypridd Museum, really suffered very badly from flooding as a result of really the sort of heavy downpours, monsoon-like rains that we're getting. And lo and behold, hardly had that happened when we suffered a downfall that actually flooded our ground floor as well. Fortunately, not too much serious damage done, although we were quite wet. Next slide, Eleanor. What this next slide is going to do is just quickly run through. This is a shot from our really rubbish exhibition a couple of years ago, and just sort of goes through the basic ideas that the approaches, the concept, the development, engagement, and events and activities. Takes a while to plan, identify the skills that you need, and chase the funding. Well, we were very fortunate that we actually got a decent amount of funding for this exhibition on extreme weather. Kent County Council and locally at Herne Bay from our Herne Bay Festival had money which they put forward to us, for which we were very grateful. Partnerships and publicity, of course, and we spent quite a lot of time engaging with the local authorities, schools and groups, and of course involving our museum volunteers, because we are a volunteer-run museum, apart from a part-time museum administrator. From a visitor point of view, our funding enabled us to be free entry for a couple of months. And then I'll talk about some of the events and activities, the school workshops that we ran. Myself being at the exhibition to take people around and engage our visitors in discussion about climate change, and then outside events and activities. So next one, Eleanor. So the entrance foyer set the scene. We picked a couple of national newspaper and local newspaper headlines warning us about what we might expect in the future, and especially the flooding we had last September in the centre of town here. We're actually in the middle of town. We're built on a former estuary. It's one of these hidden rivers, underground rivers, and being very low lying, as I said earlier, prone to flooding. Next one. What we did in the exhibition, we used our four walls, and we tried to use the three-dimensional space in the room, which I'll show you in a minute. We introduced people to the basic ideas of climate change. We hung up some seaweed to tell the weather, and we put up a barometer, and we installed a little weather station. And we talked a bit about the major climate change drivers, methane and carbon dioxide. And just down the road, in fact, where the Powell Cotton is, are the chalk cliffs of Thanet. And it's the minute algae that were in the sea way back in the Cretaceous and still in the sea today, that are and were major carbon sinks. And our chalk cliffs just a few miles away do tell a story of climate change, of all those hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, 60 to 150 million years ago. So that engaged people with the sort of local aspects of the climate. Next one, Eleanor. What we then did was, can we go back one? You jumped, that's it, thanks. We got a lot of objects out from our archives, and we have quite a good photographic record going back to the late 19th century, which shows past flooding in Herne Bay. And we have a good photographic, good postcard collection that we were able to put up. We were able to get out old newspapers that we have that dealt with these events, especially the flooding of 1953, when the surge tide hit the southern North Sea, flooding the southeast of England, the Netherlands, and Herne Bay area. We were well and truly underwater. And that provided a very good means for discussion with our visitors, and quite a few of whom actually were around during the flood of 1953. And flooding, as I said, and have said several times, has been quite a problem. Next one. So we've also had the effects of extreme cold. In 62, 63, the sea froze to a mile offshore. We haven't had that for the last 25 or more years. And again, it invoked old memories. Hurricanes have affected our coastline, causing the demolition, the loss of our pier at Herne Bay, and a lot of damage to the town sea front, all of which we have pictures and artwork that we were able to put out on display. Coastal collapse, our geology, because we're above the chalk layer, we are very soft, sandy, clayey coastlines, and we suffer very badly from coastal collapse. And again, this is reflected in a lot of past newspaper and items. We also are able to put on, we got hold of old film heritage of the 1953 flood. Now you'll see in this slide little transparent things dangling down from the ceiling. This is where we tried to use the whole 3 dimension of the room, and each of those little dangly discs has an aspect of climate change, things that we're familiar with today, the massive fires that have raged in many parts of the world, the flooding, the hurricanes, the storms, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the amount of methane in the atmosphere, and how this has increased considerably. And so we dug out 100 to 120 key things that have affected climate change both now, recently, and in the past. And again, we didn't expect people to look at every one, but it did offer a means of conversation. Can we have the next slide, please? Yes, we then turn to climate change, and the emphasis of our exhibition was very much on Herne Bay and its immediate environment. So we didn't touch on the melting of the glaciers and the details of the heat domes on the west coast of Canada and so forth. We really focused locally. So we looked at our changes to our local environment, and we looked at how moth and butterfly distributions using objects from our display, our collection, and how moths and butterflies have migrated north at the rate of 5 kilometers a year over the recent past. We looked at how blue tits in our gardens are out, their breeding is out of pace with the hatching of caterpillars from butterflies and moths. And so blue tit populations could crash and are crashing. And then by contrast, we used to have little egrets on our coast, which disappeared in late medieval Tudor times due to both the mini ice age climate change and to local hunting. But recent climate changes have meant that the little egrets come back to Britain. It spread back from residual populations in Spain and Portugal, and we're now having breeding populations on our coast. Next slide. And we, being the Seaside Museum, Herne Bay, we obviously touched on our seaside natural history, and it's something that people engage with very much, and pointed out how your favorite fish and chips meal is going to migrate north to breed, while you'll see many more jellyfish in our waters. And we showed some small snail-like mollusks that have spread along the English Channel to East Kent, again in response to climate change and the warming of sea temperatures. Tied in with this is the fact that people at Herne Bay are not skating on the ice, but are actually swimming in the sea throughout the year. And tied in with that also is that we have a non-native oyster, the Pacific oyster, which is now an environmental pest on our coastline. And that the Pacific oyster was not supposed to be able to breed in our on our coast because of our lower sea temperatures, but because they've increased over the last 25, 30 years, it is now able to breed, and it's spreading very widely and causing an awful lot of problems. Next slide. And we got out some objects, subfossil objects from Pleistocene objects we have in our collection: woolly mammoth, woolly mammoth, a woolly rhino, long-tusked elephant remains, as examples of creatures that have gone extinct as a result of both climate change and the impact of man on the environment. Next. Very popular with children. And we looked at, we devoted one wall to fashion and climate, fast fashion, and the environmental impacts of fast fashion. And we had some very talented volunteers, one of whom you'll look at this colored object in front of you is in fact an overcoat made out of plastic bags, and a drape made out of plastic bags. And another one of our volunteers made a whole outfit from recycled jeans, old jeans, and items bought from charity workshops, charity shops, and it made a most beautiful costume. And we then suggested to people simple things that we were just listening to, things that we can do: walk to the museum, come on your bike, use the bus, use less electricity. No, we don't have plastic around everywhere, and do your best to recycle. And next one. An important aspect of this is engaging the community. We did this with the schools, and I'll tell you very briefly about a school project, but we engaged all sorts of groups, local disabled groups, our recycling groups. But with the school, we used a formula that in our Really Rubbish exhibition, where we got the children to see the exhibition and then express their feelings about climate change. Next slide. And we did this by getting them to make an animation, a short 2 to 3 minute film. They developed the storyline, they did the artwork for the characters, and with the help of our artist and storyteller and animator, the children put together, next slide, made an animation film, which we're hoping to see very, very soon. And they did, with the filmmaker, put the film together, did all the voiceovers, and we're hoping to be able to show it at our local cinema. And we did this with the Really Rubbish exhibition. So it's the youth, the young people who are going to have the legacy of what we're leaving them. And boy, are they switched on to this, and very much so. Next slide.
Sorry, Ian.
Okay, nearly done.
Are you nearly okay?
Yeah, last slide is events and activities on the seashore. We did walks and talks. We had a litter pick, and there's a lot of concern locally about sea level rise. And so we did a number of events and activities, all of which gave a conversation with our local community. Okay, we'll stop there. That was just the final word from the children.
Thank you so much, Ian. That's
okay.
Really, really interesting. We're gonna have to have some more of our Southeast Museum Mardle gatherings so that we can hear a bit more, I think. And yeah, definitely everybody needs to go and visit whenever they're nearby. But thank you so much for that. And so I'm just going to pass over quickly to our final speaker, Marta Lomza, a past colleague of mine from the excellent Museum of Oxford, Community Engagement and Exhibitions Officer there. Marta has worked in the role since autumn 2018, having previously worked in various museums and in archive roles. Outside of work, she's been an active member of a local network of community groups taking action on climate change called CAG Oxfordshire, where she has previously co-ran a community garden, a pop-up food surplus cafe, and a repair cafe, as well as sat on the network's board of directors as its co-chair for 2 years. She's interested in people-centric narratives around climate change and the intersections between climate work and social justice work. Over to you, Marta.
Thanks, David. I'm going to try and do the same thing with my presentation, but oh, I think I can do it. Is that working for me?
Yeah, that's working, Marta.
Oh, amazing. Great. I don't know why I'm special, but that's great. Okay, I'm going to try and do a slideshow then. Perfect. Okay, so everybody can see that? Okay. Brilliant,
yeah,
thanks.
It's all working.
Great, thank you. So yeah, my name's Marta Lomza, and as David said, I'm the Community Engagement and Exhibitions Officer at the Museum of Oxford. And I mentioned that because I will be speaking very much from the point of view of my work. So like what Louisa said earlier, less operations and more community and exhibitions. The Museum of Oxford is a small local authority run museum in the heart of Oxford. We tell the story of Oxford and its people, so it's social history and local history. We are located in the Oxford Town Hall in the city centre, where the museum has been since its inception in 1975. Recently, we've undergone a huge refurbishment project, so the whole museum was completely gutted and redone. So what you see on your screens is a brand new, fresh museum, which opened in October 2021. So we are now in a completely new space. What I will talk about today are 3 areas, again, a bit like Louisa. In fact, all I'll be talking about is sort of very similar to what Louisa's already mentioned, so I think I will reinforce some of her points. So my 3 areas will touch on motivation, keeping motivated, strategy, and communication. And I'm sharing this grid with you right now because it's something that I use a lot when I think about sustainability efforts in museums. And try to do things which are impactful. We're all strapped for resources, so it's kind of trying to think about where to put our resources, where it's most useful. So the first point I wanted to make is about keeping motivated. So I think working on climate change and sustainability in museums is really hard. It can be really lonely, and it can be really demotivating. It seems like a really overwhelming thing to tackle. So I think what is actually really important is not just go for the high impact things all the time, but every now and then at least start do small things, and maybe start small if it's something that you haven't tackled before at all. So what I'm sharing here is a picture from Queer Inspires, an exhibition which we had in 2019, which was co-curated with the local community, and for which we won the Sustainable Project of the Year award at the Museums and Heritage Awards. I won't talk too much about what we actually did to earn that award, but I will post a link in the chat, which will take you to the case study where you can see what we've done exactly. But what I wanted to talk about here is that for me, making the exhibition less environmentally impactful, so we have cut down on waste and we have cut down on carbon emissions on that temporary exhibition. For me, achieving that wasn't actually didn't actually require that much effort in some ways, because I was already plugged into that network of community groups doing things in very much an environmentally aware way. So I could plug into that in terms of finding the right solutions and the right people to do certain things. But what it did achieve was really visible, and it was something that for us, I think, set the bar and started us on this journey of trying to do more work on climate change within the museum. And I think it remains something that's a little bit of an accountability reminder in terms of where we want to be with our activities. And like I say, I think it's just really motivating to do something where you see the impact. So at the end of the exhibition, I ended up with a very small bag of waste, non-recyclable waste. It was literally less than a sort of a carrier bag. So that was something where we got a bit of a sense of achievement and which spurred us on. And I wouldn't underestimate that. It's hard work and it's ongoing work. So I think it's really important to keep ourselves motivated. My second point is about being strategic. So that's speaking back to that grid and thinking about where our resources should go. We sort of, while we were undergoing the big refurbishment project, we were located in a slightly different space, and the town hall itself looked a little bit different. And then of course, COVID happened and so on. But we are now at a stage where we can actually create a working group, which is something that we're just about to start next week, on which we will have representatives from the museum team, including the shop manager, but we'll also have people from the cafe, which is run by an external company, as well as operational staff from the town hall, so that everybody across the building is part of this group and can make decisions together. And what we will look at in our first meeting is choosing some frameworks to base our work on. So I'm sharing here the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which probably you are all familiar with, but I'm also sharing the Green Arts Oxfordshire Network's Green Arts Charter, which is something a bit more local to us. So we will be looking at these frameworks and establishing which areas we can actually take feasible action on, and where we can put our resources to, and where the impact will be most felt. And in order to sort of decide on where the impact is, where the biggest impact might be, we will be conducting a carbon audit, probably to start with, using Julie's Bicycles tool on their website, which is really accessible and a really good conversation starter. And we also try to network wider, so there's plenty of networks, global and national networks, that we can become part of, that I think is also really helpful in terms of kind of choosing the strategy. And then finally, I wanted to talk about communication. So that's again something that both Ian and Louisa touched on, is working with communities and talking to communities. And that is something that the Museums Association talks about a lot as well, and everybody who deals with museums and climate change, is that museums are a really good place for having conversations about climate change. But I think for us as a local history museum, it's less actually about talking about climate change explicitly, and more about weaving in stories of climate change and sustainable solutions into everything that we do. So the two examples I'm sharing with you here, the top ones are from a temporary exhibition which was called Mixing Matters, which was based on a project on food heritage, where we worked with several different communities from Oxford. And really, we didn't talk about sustainability as it's in its own right, but people brought objects from their family homes and from their that sort of spoke to their family histories. And a lot of those objects were produced in a way which we would today regard as, pioneering sustainable solutions and low impact solutions. So it was a little bit about picking out those examples and highlighting them in the exhibition. So you see in the right photo, you see that there was a question which we included in the exhibition, which was about what examples of environmentally friendly design and practices can you see on display? And that's to get people thinking about where those solutions might already be in the past, so that they get inspired about the future, and also so that they see those examples in their own communities. And I think what's particularly valuable about that is that it brings in a more diverse group of people. There are criticisms of, particularly, I think, the British environmental movement, in that it tends to be quite white, or it tends to centre white narratives. And I think this can be one of the sort of counteracting tools for making sure that it's everybody's stories get included. And even when we don't sort of label something as environmentalism or environmental action, it actually has those elements in it which are worth talking about and really valuable. And then on the bottom, what you see here is a picture of Oxford's low traffic neighbourhoods. So this is a relatively recent initiative by the Oxford City Council, which is meant to encourage cycling and walking and discourage short trips by car. It's been hugely controversial in Oxford, and the controversies seem to split largely along sort of socioeconomic lines. So it tends to be people from lower income backgrounds and more deprived neighbourhoods who are against them, and then people from the wealthier neighbourhoods on higher incomes who are in favour of these. But a lot of the actual solutions are in those less wealthy neighbourhoods. And we have an upcoming creative writing project at the museum, which looks at everyday Oxford and valuing everyday experiences. And one of the themes in the creative writing sessions will be low traffic neighbourhoods, with the idea being to create a space where people with different views can actually come together and express their views and tell each other where they're coming from and why they choose to either be pro or against this solution. And I think that's really important because I think it's really important because I think that climate change in museums and anywhere really has to be about people. It has to include people, and it has to be based on conversations with people. We're at a stage now where everybody has to take action. A lot of it has to happen at the sort of high level of local authorities and governments and so on. But we have to make sure that everybody embraces these solutions and that they're done with in a way that actually benefits people, or where they can see the benefits of these solutions, so that we don't further split communities, and so that everybody gets behind the solutions that we actually have to adopt now. So I think that's all I wanted to say, really. So yeah, these are my 3 points. Keep yourself motivated, whatever works for you. Think strategically, because it's a big topic, so you have to choose what you can do, and facilitate communication in whatever way you can. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marta, and thank you, Ian, and thank you, Louisa. We've because of the time we're on at the moment, because we've had lots of interesting presentations, loads of stuff being covered. I'm just going to ask our panel one question, but we're going to go into breakout rooms in just a minute, and there we'll have an opportunity to discuss a little bit further the points that the panelists have raised and what you're doing in your own museum or site. So just that question quickly, Sharon asked for all panelists, how do you refer to your work in this area? Greening seems old-fashioned, sustainability is too broad, climate crisis is too challenging for some, climate change might sound like we are playing it down. So she's interested in hearing your views as to how you describe it. Sorry, I should pick on someone. Marta, I'll go back to you.
Thanks, David. I mean, I don't think sustainability is too broad, personally. We do use that quite a lot. I use it in two senses. You know, I use it to say that our efforts have to be sustainable as well. So it's about sort of the resources, time and money and people power that we have. And I think it's something that a lot of people can relate to. But I also I use different terms for different occasions, I'd say, and sort of tailor it to my audience a bit and to the purposes.
That makes sense. Ian, do you have any comments on what term you use or terms you use?
Well, we used a climate warning because we set up the exhibition to coincide with COP26, which was national headlines at the time. I don't think people had any strong objections. In fact, they engaged in lots of conversations. So I was happy with a climate warning. As I said, being able to particularly bring local experiences to the exhibition and to relate to the exhibition and what the message we were trying to communicate.
Thanks, Ian. Louisa, any comments on that?
I agree with Marta that it sort of depends on what you're focusing on with that particular event or project. But I think for our site, green does actually make quite a lot of sense because of that journey that I illustrated that we've been on, and also bearing in mind that it's not just a climate emergency, but there's a huge problem with biodiversity loss due to it's all interlinked. So I think green isn't necessarily too soft, depending on your situation.
Can I just add that we're organising a BioBlitz weekend to coincide with the start of the COP15 conference in April in China. So we're doing all sorts of walks, outside walks and events on the seashore, wildflowers, birds and so forth, to think about our local biodiversity.
Thanks, Ian. That's really great. Thank you all the panelists, and I'm going to hand over quickly to Eleanor, and then we can chat about this a bit more.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Louisa, Ian and Marta. That was a really fabulous discussion. If only we had more time, but we need to get on and get into our breakout rooms to talk a little bit more about how we can do something on the ground, and personally and professionally. So I'm going to hand over to our brilliant visitor, well, not our brilliant, so our brilliant Southeast rep, Rebecca Blackburn, who is the visitor engagement manager at the Royal Engineers Museum in Kent, who is going to lead a fairly quick networking session on the climate crisis for us now. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Eleanor. Yep, I took myself off mute. And thank you to everyone who's spoken. It's been really interesting. I hope everyone's enjoyed themselves today. So yeah, we're going to finish with some really fast networking. As before, everyone's going to go into a breakout room, and then we're going to discuss the question, what have you done to contribute to the environment or towards the climate crisis, personally or professionally, in the last year? So I think if we head into breakout rooms, and let's get going.
I'm gonna leave now, if that's okay.
Of course it is. Thank you so much.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
it was all a bit like rushed.
That's okay. Yeah, I was trying to rush it a bit, but hopefully we all got out what we wanted. So, but yeah, really nice to be here. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And I might well be in touch because I'm deputy editor of Museums Journal, and we are going to be running a review of the Museum of Oxford, and it'd be nice to. Anyway, but I'll email you.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, that'd be great. All right, thanks, Eleanor.
Right, see you soon. Bye.
See you soon. Bye, Ian. Bye, Lisa. Bye-bye.
Eleanor, did you want us to join the breakout rooms? Was that the idea, or?
We don't automatically get allocated. You have done a marvelous job, and you don't need to worry anymore. So if you need or want to go, you're most welcome to. If you want to stick around, there's not much more. I'm just sort of going to close the meeting once everybody comes back, really.
Okay then. Well, I think I'm going to take your leave, Eleanor,
Thank you so much. And as Sharon said, we're like, you know, I really want to visit Herne Bay Trust Museum as well now. So yeah.
Well, the climate exhibition is finished. We've got another one on at the minute, but as I said, we've got events coming up. So
what's the one on at the moment?
At the moment, we're dealing with Amy Johnson, the aviator. She was, I don't know if you know the story, how she flew an aeroplane from Britain to Australia in the 30s and was piloting aircraft in the Second World War from places of construction to airfields and crashed in the Thames estuary off Herne Bay. So yeah, so that's the story. She's on at the minute, and that's followed on by our we have an annual photographic competition. So it's a photography theme that will be on in a couple of weeks' time for another couple of months.
Wow, busy schedule. Well,
yeah.
I will be in touch because it'd be brilliant to hear what you have going on in the future as well. So but thank you so much for being part of this meeting today.
Okay, if you eventually look on our website, we will have, when the children's film is ready, it'll be on our website as well. So you'll be able to see the children's concern about climate change. And it was great to have them in the museum and have their points of view. Yeah, good.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you, Louisa. Thank you.
Bye.
Wow. Has any? I mean, that
was fun.
It's a fun half an hour. Oh dear.
Oh, I think you know, hopefully it wasn't like, you know, kind of a duck paddling underwater and then
I think
floating serenely on top.
I think it really felt like that. I mean, I was really worried I was going to sort of accidentally click a message to everyone saying,
I know. I kept checking. Am I saying this?
Well done. Well done. Yeah. If you don't mind, I might actually just quickly run to the loo before.
Yeah, don't worry. There's like 5 minutes left. I might bring them back in a bit. Do you think I should give them a full 10 minutes or?
You don't need to. I mean,
I could just bring them back in about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll wait till you come back and then.
I shouldn't think that they're going to notice that it's not been the full 10 minutes.
No, I'll send a message saying we're closing the chat in 10 seconds or something. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And nobody's going to complain if we finish like a couple of minutes early.
Well, let's see. Yeah, because there's still 5 minutes to go, and then maybe I'll just like give them. Anyway, I'll let you go. And,
3 minutes. So we come back at 55, and then I'll close, and we'll finish at like 57 or 58, something like that. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be back. I'm just going to mute so nobody hears my flush.
Hi.
I'm back. Need to
give them 1 more minute and then bring them back in.
Let's be generous. What have you done to contribute towards the climate crisis, sustainability?
I like the question because it's kind of like, yeah, I've been using a car, so that contributes to the climate crisis, and I've been taking flights, so I've done quite a lot. Anyway.
We left early. Do you want me to carry on, or are you going to wind up?
Do carry on if there's anything to report back.
Yep, I'll just, is everyone back in now?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Okay, hello everyone, welcome back. We've got a few minutes left, so I don't know if anyone has anything they wanted to feed back from their groups, anything that they talked about and wanted to share, any projects or personal stories at all. Just wave if so, or just start talking.
Can I just say thank you very much for today, and it was really very inspiring and interesting to be from the beginning of the meeting until now. I didn't have a chance to say thank you to everyone, but yeah, it's really useful. And the last talk today, so I was just sharing as an artist myself, collage artwork. I use materials, old materials to build on the exhibition. And I would like to invite you all to come to the exhibition. Will be in the Museum of Oxford in April starting. To see some artwork made in Iraq, because I'm originally from Iraq, and is made by an artist she likes to do a lot of artwork, but the materials is not available, so she used what is available at home, even precious materials, to, instead of throw it away, to reform it in a very beautiful artwork. And that's the idea of my exhibition called Of Ordinary Things, and how we survived during the war until now. The art is helping us as well, covered here in the meeting, of well-being and mental health and things. So it's all very interesting talk today, and thank you to everyone.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, we talked about sustainable fashion and reusing and recycling old materials. So that's really interesting to see that you're tying into that as well, and we'll keep our eyes out for that exhibition. If no one else has got anything to say, I will hand back to Eleanor.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was really brilliant of you to lead that. And I hope everybody's got lots out of it, of what they can do personally and, like I said before, personally and professionally, and how you can actually instigate change across your organization, as well as make little changes around your house. And thank you, Rana, for your contribution as well. That was really, really nice. So thank you everybody for such an enlightening afternoon. Before we close, I'd like to reiterate a really big thank you to everyone, and for everybody who's joined us to attend the meeting. I'd also like to remind you that for those of you who are interested in pursuing any thoughts and contributions about the climate crisis, it's going to be one of our leading themes at the Museums Association annual conference in November in Edinburgh, which is really exciting, on the 3rd to the 5th of November. And that there's still a 10% early bird discount, which is really important because I'm sure we're all, struggling from fuel costs, and, even pints cost more at the moment. So, we've got an early bird discount until the end of March, and the early bird catches the worm, if I wanted to say something marginally biodiverse. But in the meantime, thank you again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days, and hopefully see you in Edinburgh or somewhere in between. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.